Good morning. I provide the New Zealand greeting, kia ora koutou, which means good health to you all. WPA President Dinesh Bogra, incoming President Helen Herman, WPA committee colleagues in Osaka, Japan, who have brought this event together, including notably Masatoshi Takeda, Toshifumi Kishimoto, and Tsushoi Akiyama. Ladies and gentlemen, I pay respects to all involved in this meeting and register thanks for the invitation for me to make a contribution. The invitation is a considerable compliment because I'm someone who's not a medical graduate, although I do hail from a medical family, with my father having been a general practitioner and my mother a nurse. I also wish to underline an apology for not being able to be with you all physically because of an unexpected intervening event. To give you some background context as to myself, my initial professional background involved being a lawyer and then a judge. In both pursuits, that included a connection with mental health, as in my time, confinement in a psychiatric hospital in New Zealand could only occur after some kind of judicial order. I then worked for a decade as an ombudsman, where jurisdiction regarding ensuring fairness on the part of government ministries and officials extended over the health sector. I then spent some time as chairman of a confidential forum for former inpatients of psychiatric hospitals, where, in a step designed at resolving issues for those who had been detained in hospital for treatment, who wished to raise matters about the conditions or behaviours they had encountered with staff or with other patients, but who did not wish to pursue this in court proceedings or other public settings, was heard. This was an attempt to provide a truth and reconciliation process, and that has continued successfully as an endeavour for redress in New Zealand until this year. As a result of these varied experiences, I have maintained from the sideline an abiding interest in mental health issues. I'm currently a trustee of a mental health services delivery organisation in New Zealand, and I offer best wishes to the WPA and the importance of the work that you continue to do. I first want to set out the background against which mental health is practiced. In broad terms, it can be said that the world population today is more than 7 billion. I think the precise figure is 7.3 billion. In 2005, it was 6.5 billion. And in 10 years' time, in 2025, it will have reached 8 billion. All of you, as medical practitioners in the psychiatric field, will know that in all countries, people with mental health disabilities represent a significant proportion of this number. It will be accepted that mental health conditions apply worldwide, and that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. Dementia, schizophrenia, depression, and addiction make up the bulk of this. 1 million people die each year due to suicide. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among young people. Depression is the leading cause of years lost due to disability. Mental health problems, including alcohol abuse, are among the 10 leading causes of disability. Depression is ranked third in the global burden of diseases, and mental health unhappily results in stigma and discrimination and abuse. Despite this prevalence, the case I am to make today is that there is insufficient acknowledgement of this nationally as well as internationally. The WHO in 2008, in a paper to which I will refer twice in the course of this address, said as follows: much more effort is required to change policy, practice and service delivery systems to ensure mental health needs and concerns receive the level of priority necessary to reduce the burden associated with mental, neurological and substance use disorders. There should be, so the WHO said, no more excuses for marginalising funding for the delivery of mental health services. We need to ensure that the area of mental health receives its fair share of public health resources. I then want to turn to describe what awareness exists of mental health and the need to combat its effects. Starting with the United Nations, Article 25(1) of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that 1. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. As to this fundamental document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I make the comment, although there may be global reference to the right of people to receive medical care, there is no specific mention of mental health care. It will be recalled that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was promulgated in 1948, and that at the millennium in 2000, much attention was focused on setting goals to alleviate disparity and inequality. The Millennium Development Goals, decided upon by United Nations resolution in the year 2000, focused international attention on primary needs at that time. The 8 chapters of what have become called the MDG, Millennium Development Goals, were stated as follows: 1. Eradicate poverty and hunger. 2. Achieve universal primary education. 3. Promote gender equality and empower women. 4. Reduce child mortality rate. 5. Improve maternal health. 6. Combat HIV/AIDS and other diseases. 7. Ensure environmental sustainability. And 8. Develop a global partnership for development. The point that I wish to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that despite the prevalence of mental health in every part of the world, it is a matter of record and surprise that there is a lack of mention of mental health as something needing urgent and timely attention. The next international instrument to which I want to refer is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD, which came into being in 2007 and which states in Article 25 in part as follows: States parties recognise that persons with disabilities have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health without discrimination on the basis of disability. States parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure access for persons with disabilities to health services that are gender sensitive, including health-related rehabilitation. In particular, states parties shall provide persons with disabilities with the same range, quality and standard of free or affordable health care and programs as provided to other persons, including in the area of sexual and reproductive health and population-based public health programs. I wish to make the point that whilst the CRPD is more specific, there is still comment available that mental health is not specifically mentioned. I personally have a background with the Commonwealth, which is a grouping of 53 countries bound by common ties of language and a commitment to the rule of law and democracy. In 2013, a new Commonwealth Charter was drawn up and promulgated, which gave new direction and purpose to the member states. The Charter expressed the following about health: access to health, education, food and shelter. We recognise the necessity of access to affordable health care, education, clean drinking water, sanitation and housing for all citizens, and emphasise the importance of promoting health and well-being in combating communicable and non-communicable diseases. We recognise the right of everyone to have access to safe, sufficient and nutritious food, consistent with the progressive realisation of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security. Again, whilst this is a laudable modern view about achieving equity and justice, there is no specific mention of mental health. Based on reference to these international materials, I want to submit that I have made a case in favour of mental health becoming a more significant agenda item. This year, 2015, is a good time for raising this issue because during this year, the Millennium Development Goals, to which I have made reference already, are being reviewed. Just a few weeks ago, in early April, I listened to a lecture delivered in London by the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme by the United Nations UNDP administrator and former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark, in which she spoke of the many efforts being made this year about refocusing the goals set 15 years ago, some of which have been achieved, but a number of which have fallen below what was then planned and expected. Helen Clark said as follows: "The good news is that 2015 offers a unique opportunity to reset the compass. This is a once-in-a-generation year for development, with 4 major global processes and summits relating to development taking place. Their outcomes will set priorities for the next generation. Ambition needs to be high, given the magnitude of the challenges." She went on to describe the 4 major processes: the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which took place in Sendai, Japan in March; the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris in December, where a new global agreement is due to be reached, and must be reached if there is any credible chance of stopping the worst impacts of climate change; the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development, which is to occur in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in July; and lastly, the one I wish to focus on, is the Special Summit on Sustainable Development in New York in September. It is the 4th, the September Summit, when UN member states are due to agree on a successor framework to the Millennium Development Goals, which I wish to draw your attention to today. This will build on the MDG experience to date. The focus and funding driven by the MDGs to the present time has effected a number of positive changes, such as an increased school enrolment and decreased mortality among children. Things such as access to drinkable water and combating HIV, malaria and TB have also registered progress. The way is clear, it seems, for the United Nations to create an even more ambitious agenda than the MDGs conveyed. It is into this space that I'm going to submit that there is room to reposition the matter of mental health and its alleviation. It seems to me that attention to mental health can take its place alongside environmental sustainability and human development more generally. I'm thus at a point where I can raise the matter of what I would submit will be suitable actions. Submissions could be developed and made to the appropriate group or groups considering the question of health with a view to the United Nations prioritising mental health. There is then potential for smaller groups of nations to develop a strategy to deal with this and offer what may be done as a benchmark. One such benchmark group, could be the Commonwealth, with its 53 countries, 31 small states, 2.2 billion people, 60% of whom are under 30, and the Commonwealth comprising some of the world's richest, for example, the United Kingdom and Canada, and among the world's poorest countries, Malawi and Uganda, for example. There is already talk of a Commonwealth Convention on Mental Health. In preparation of this paper, my attention was directed to note doctors named Barraclough and Hayes, working out of Adelaide, Australia, who have suggested this. Commonwealth health ministers meet regularly. Their last meeting in 2014 issued a statement of which the following is part. Commonwealth health ministers held their annual meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, on the eve of the 67th World Health Assembly. The theme of the meeting was Commonwealth Post-2015 Health Agenda, strengthening health policies and systems. Ministers noted that the MDGs had had significant impact in positioning health in the development agenda and in galvanising multi-stakeholder partnerships. They acknowledged significant progress in reducing under 5 and maternal mortality, increasing immunisation coverage, and increased access to HIV and TB treatment, including availability of affordable antiretrovirals. Ministers, however, noted that many countries may not achieve the health-related MDGs by 2015, especially MDGs 4, 5 and 6. Hence, there is a need for continued commitment to accelerating progress in achieving these goals while learning lessons from the MDG era. Ministers highlighted the significant economic returns of investing to improve health and noticed the high cost of inadequate health investment. They discussed the concept of universal health coverage and, whilst noting the challenges, acknowledged the need to ensure that all citizens have equitable access to quality and affordable essential health services which people need without enduring financial hardship, that being in a manner that is sustainable in the long term. Ministers agreed that the post-2015 development agenda could include universal health coverage, address the unfinished business of the MDGs, cognizant of the need to accelerate progress on reducing maternal, newborn and child mortality, and incorporate a life course approach to health with a focus on morbidity, non-communicable diseases, strengthening health systems, equitable access to medicines, and links to other development goals. It is my earnest suggestion that attention to mental health will fit with this admirably. If you, ladies and gentlemen, are persuaded that a case has been advanced for mental health to be more prominent as an issue affecting countries throughout the world, one might then ask, how is this to be done? As an outsider to your number, I hope that the following suggestions may find some degree of acceptance, and I express them not in order of importance. In order to advance the case to the United Nations, it would seem desirable to appoint a task force, whose task it would be to draft and present submissions to the relevant subgroup of the UN meeting in September. Securing a place on the agenda will be a considerable task. It may well be that having secured preliminary interest this year, then a more detailed submission can be lodged next year, as the MDG realignment is likely to be a process that will not be resolved with just one meeting. Then, if it were thought desirable, submissions could be made to a forthcoming meeting of Health Ministers of the Commonwealth. They have met for their 2015 meeting in recent years, and although focusing on ageing, there was no specific reference to mental health. The same task force might be empowered to work on a specific convention regarding mental health. This would need attention being provided to similarities and differences. Without going into this matter in the detail required, there would be much positive to be stated about similarities or differences between statutes and definitions of conditions. A convenient starting point here is the 2013 study commissioned by the Commonwealth Foundation called Mental Health, a Legislative Framework to Empower, Protect and Care. It was authored by two medical practitioners from the Centre for Mental Health Law and Policy, Indian Law Society, Pune, India, the authors being Sumitra Padare and Jaya Sagade. A number of sobering findings were expressed. Examples include legislation in many countries having been enacted before modern treatments became available and before many human rights instruments currently in force came into operation. Mental health legislation in only 11% of Commonwealth states specifically include provisions that mental health care should be provided on an equal basis with physical health care. Mental health legislation in only 9% of Commonwealth member states promotes voluntary admission and treatment as the preferred alternative for treatment of mental disorders. More than 2/3 of the mental health laws do not have a judicial or quasi-judicial body to review involuntary admissions and treatment. There were a number of conclusions, such as that mental health legislation in many Commonwealth member states is outdated and does not provide compliance with international human rights obligations. It was also said that the language of mental health laws in many instances adds to negative perceptions and further stigmatization of persons with mental disorders. It called for improved accessibility to mental health care and on a basis that enables them to live and participate in their communities. It called for measures to include families and caregivers. As a result, there was a call for urgent reform of mental health legislation, ensuring compliance with human rights treaties. All of this, ladies and gentlemen, leads to a submission that action is called for aimed at the upper levels of policy formulation as well as lower down within individual countries and communities. It needs action to be agreed upon involving individual medical practitioners. Something that is potent is the general respect paid by the community in most parts of the world to medical professionals. Even a letter advanced by a medical professional is something of which notice is taken. At an operational level, there is also much work to be done in terminology and documentation, and education of professionals and those who assist them in their work. I said that I would make another reference to a WHO study in 2008. This was published now 6 years ago. And in its published paper called the Mental Health Gap Action Program, the following statement was made. Scaling up mental health care is a social, political and institutional process that engages many contributors, interest groups and organisations. Governments, health professionals for mental health disorders, civil society, communities and families, with support from the international community, are all jointly responsible for successfully taking up this scaling up process of making mental health care available to all. The way forward, it said, is to build innovative partnerships and alliances. All of this to which I have spoken about would be in the eventual interest of the consumer, the person or persons who at the end of the day need and desire relief in their quest for wellness. There is much work to be done, and it is hugely worthwhile because the end result will be to create a level playing field for the 21st century mental health patient, something that I submit is very desirable. The enormity of the task is considerable and was perhaps put aptly by the well-known international financier George Soros, who said, admittedly in a different context, as follows: I see tremendous imbalance in the world, a very uneven playing field, which has gotten tilted very badly. I consider it unstable. At the same time, I don't exactly see what is going to reverse it. May I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that the matter I have raised will be best attended to by well-meaning and caring and sufficiently motivated professionals in your respected field. Thank you for your courteous attention.